Okay, so over the past couple of weeks, I built out the agent operating system of the company, but it's become a bit chaotic and unwieldy. Obviously, I don't want to rebuild everything from scratch, though that might be something I'll have to do. In any case, what I want to do is for Claude Cowork to look through the directory structure and then build out every subfolder as in a way that it reflects the functions and areas that are needed in the company. Now, some of these areas will have activities, will have processes that should be run by the AI agents that I put in place. So certain things like data entry processes, when I send out invoices or get payment confirmations, that type of thing should just happen automatically without human involvement. So the results should just end up in a log file or dashboard so that I can just see that things have happened. Obviously, I need to make sure that these workflows, the interfaces, the agent actions are spelled out correctly. And I also don't want to just rely on Claude or Anthropic's platform and the processing of activities through markdown files to be the only thing that is in place, while the system of skills and agents, like everything they put in place is pretty good. What it is lacking from what I can see from my experience is any type of protocol for agents beyond MCPs. So MCPs are obviously to connect Claude as a platform to other tools so that it can push requests to tools and then receive data. In some cases, it's pretty comprehensive and useful. So if you connect it to N8N, for instance, Claude can build automations for you. You just describe what you're trying to do, and it will push that into N8N. That's super powerful. In other cases, what the connector can do is pretty limited. Beyond that, there's also no other protocols in use from what I can see, and there's a bunch of others like A2A, UCP, for identifying agents, for payments and transactions, for service level quality. Those things are not, from what I can see, followed through. Maybe they are internally. I would need to research that. But these are pretty important because you want to make sure that the AI process only returns an output when it meets a certain level of quality. So when it uses internet links as sources and refers to websites, you obviously actually want these to be true. So it would need to go back, check the links, make sure these are in place, and actually just use a tool to do that instead of it hallucinating that those websites do exist. So you can't have LLMs just validating LLM outputs either. But there are external tools that do this. There are also external tools that do scraping pretty well. So there's Crawl for AI, for instance, which is a Python-based web crawler, and the LLM will just use that and just return those results. So it won't have to go through websites individually, and that tool is also able to just pick up on the latest changes on a website instead of going through the entire website over and over again. So there are a ton of useful open source tools to expand what Claude can do, but you need to put some protocols in place. I noticed that my entire framework and structure started to get bloated because there was no good framework and structure in place in the first place. And that's because, well, this is still pretty new. Everyone's just experimenting. There's no good rules or guidelines or templates or best practices that I've seen yet. So I'm going to have Claude go through the entire directory structure, including all of the customer folders and everything that I built out, and then try to put a structure in place that makes more sense. And it needs to be one that's not classical functional areas, because with AI tools and data-driven decisions being made, I'm thinking some of these functional areas are going to massively change. So anyway, I'm going to have a pass at it. I have some ideas around what the structure should look like. And I'm also wondering whether a folder structure overall is the right approach. Maybe all of this stuff needs to sit in a database, and then all of these need to be database queries. That also goes for like any type of markdown. Maybe those should not be files, those should just be database entries. So yeah, it's going to take a bit more experimentation, but I'm going to run this and then we'll see the results. It's on going through all of the folders and files and analyzing it. It's noticed what I noticed as well, that things grew organically and became a bit of a mess, which is very much typical for any organization. It's just that things typically don't get cleaned up well. So what it found is that the structure overall, there are parts that make sense, parts that don't make sense. So it described the core problem. And now it's recommending that we organize this along different engines, so revenue, content, product, and so on. So I'm going to have to review the structure that it's proposing first, see if it aligns with what I had in mind, and then make sure that I put some changes in place and that I experiment with this first before it builds everything out and moves hundreds of files around. So the good thing about the Opus model with a large context is that it pushes back to some extent and asks for feedback. Now, this is partly also because there's a few tweaks and changes I made in order to make sure that LLM doesn't just get started and starts building out things, but that I have a chance to shape the results through the conversational interface. Okay, so I'm debating back and forth a bit on what the structure should look like and whether it should be a database or a folder structure, and also on the logic of separating out activities in quote unquote engines instead of traditional functional areas. So I'm not thinking of this in terms of like HR, sales, finances, but more around revenue and delivery and product and operating activities and so on. So this is slightly different to the organization structure, to the traditional one, which is around functional areas. What I'm seeing is it's sort of confirming what I was thinking about, which is you need both the storage layer and the relationship layer. So we probably need a relational database in order to show how the information maps, how it cross-references, but we also need to store the actual files. And without setting up a database, that's going to be a bit challenging. One thing that could be done is to put that information into Notion and then have Notion refer to Google Drive, which will act as the storage. But yeah, I'm not too comfortable with like adding another tool into the infrastructure. I'd prefer to keep this lightweight. But unfortunately, outside of Google Cloud, Google doesn't have anything like this, like an Airtable or something like that inside of its Google Workspace. There were a couple of questions. It had some directions that I haven't added. So I'm letting it run through that and update its list first. So the decision I made is to make sure that we store all information in Google Drive, but we take the markdown and the relations, the cross-references between those different markdown files, and we put that in a relational database that will then refer to those files, which essentially means that either those files should not be touched and modified manually, or what we actually have is a working storage and an archival storage. which makes a lot more sense actually. Typically, if you look into organizations, you have project files, delivery files, things like that, that all reside in certain folders. And people use, versioning and file names, and like they have these cryptic, long ass file names with date and everything else embedded in, and you just lose track of what's going on over time. But what you should actually have is a repository of the ground truth. So all of your learnings, your templates, the processes, all the things that you use day to day. And you should have a working folder where all of the temporary files and all of the intermediate work resides. So these are all things that you're constantly working on and that you're changing. And then when you've made a final change, like you do a delivery to a customer or you've defined a process and you freeze it at a current state, then that's when it should be pushed into ground truth and then remain there. So then everything that you have in the working folders, you could essentially pretty much delete because you don't really need that anymore. You've already captured all of the learnings and you've captured the information that you're using. So I don't see most organizations thinking about their knowledge management, their information design along those ways. Most just separate out into functional areas and everything lives inside their folders, and every once in a while things are backed up or archived and it's just a big mess of files. But with AI tools that can go through hundreds of files quickly, and that can, where you take this software development logic of, you have basically things in production, you have a development environment, you have a testing environment. So basically we're doing what is common practice in software development, and we're applying that to how an organization is structured, how it works, and how office work happens. This is relatively new. I know there's a bunch of people that have worked on similar concepts. So far, I haven't seen anyone doing stuff like this in Claude. Most just create a bunch of markdown files or have a mess of skills and plugins. So yeah, once I'm done with that, I will capture all of the learnings and I will share that along with the structure that I have. But that said, the structure that works for me is not going to work for you because your organization's obviously different.